Okay, how's everybody doing today? Hope everybody can hear me okay. If not, can everybody hear me? Just maybe give me a quick shout out, just to be sure. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, well, I'm going to go ahead and get started here, and if you cannot hear me, maybe do something. Maybe call me on my cell. Do something to let me know that you're not able to hear it. So I want to go ahead and get started. So we have a handful of people already in the online Zoom link, and I apologize for having to send a new link. As it turns out, when we set this up on Monday, we did not click the recurring meeting button. I thought I could get that back today, and I did not, so I have to use a new Zoom link. Hopefully that hasn't distracted a lot of people. We may have some people coming in a bit late because of that, so I apologize for that. I should have anticipated that. The reason I think I didn't do it initially when I saw it was I wasn't sure what days we'd actually have classes because of scheduling issues with exams and whatnot. And I'm going to talk about exams here in a minute because I think we're going to do something a little bit different on that. So anyway, so I apologize for the change in Zoom link. I do believe that you might want to write that down, 951-4321-0325. That should be the recurring link for every class session going forward. Also, I wanted to tell everybody that I posted the link to Monday's class. It's in the Brightspace week one module. So if you go to the course site itself, the main landing page, you'll click on coursework in the upper left, content, and then you scroll down, you'll see week one, January 10th, January 16th. There's a link to a YouTube file. And I would have had that. My goal was to have gotten it to you on Monday. The thing that I think none of us probably realized was the fact that there's a class that comes in right after this one here in this room. And it takes a good 20 or 30 minutes to upload that to YouTube because it has to get compressed to an MP4 file and upload it. And so I wasn't able to do it. And when I came Monday night to campus, I had something to do at my son's school. And when I came to class or came to campus, I couldn't get in the building. So I did it last night. It's available. I set up this YouTube file. Even though I believe that you have a bit of a different view in Brightspace, but I think you can go into under communication and Zoom links. And I think you have a way to retrieve the actual Zoom recording in Zoom running on your Zoom app on your computer or whatever. I don't have the same view as you do. You could do that, but I as an additional measure, I put it as a YouTube file because I know everyone is pretty much familiar with YouTube. We've all been using it for years. And I know that YouTube is also easily playable and reversible and all that. You can back up, go forward on any device, tablets or phones or any of that. So I think that, so look for that, and I'll try to post that. Again, it's my expectation initially was that it was going to be that day I would get it posted and available. I'll try to get it every night, so I'll just have to wait until the room is clear and post it because I have to do it on the computer. This recording file is being saved on the computer itself, not in the cloud, because we just don't have enough cloud space to save it there. Unfortunately, that will change over time. So again, that's something I don't think anybody thought about when we scheduled the Attend Anywhere was the issue of having to upload that recorded file and the time it would take and back-to-backs and whatnot. Also, I loaded the PowerPoint slides to the week one module. I sent an email to distance learning because I'm concerned about this double vision thing that I see. I don't know why it's doing that. I really don't. And I have played with it. I've taken it down, deleted it, reposted it, and still seems to be happening. So distance learning is, as you can imagine, since it's the first week of the semester, pretty busy. I should probably hear from them today. Hopefully we'll get a solution. That to me is, it's irritating and annoying, but it's not something fatal. So I think we can all probably deal with that for the time being. The formatting of the syllabus and the formatting of those PowerPoint slides. And again, I sort of want to reiterate the thing I said on Monday about PowerPoint. Those PowerPoint slides, they're mostly just a way to sort of guide you and guide me as we sort of go through the class presentation. They're probably going to be of limited value, frankly, as we get approaching the exams. Okay. What else should the other thing I want to talk about is this. I have had lots of correspondence, phone calls, emails from people. And by the way, on emails, I've gotten a lot of emails, and I'm trying my best to get back to you as quickly as possible. It's a little bit heavier than normal, and there's a lot of questions that people have got. Man, it's probably understandable about the Attend Anywhere format, how it's supposed to work. I think a number of students have thought that this is a purely online course, which is understandable since we, for a very long time, did all of our courses everywhere online, and it's a little bit new. It's brand new to everybody who's doing the liberal arts. It's sort of a new thing. So I get that. And I was talking to one of my colleagues today, and I know that the way that the course was designed is that you could come to class and at the regular class time, 1:30 to 2:45 Monday, Wednesday, or you could watch it live from wherever you are on Zoom. Or you can click the recording and simply view that whenever it's posted. I'll do my best to try to get those posted as quickly as possible. But then we had this requirement that you take the exam in class or take it at the testing center. And I think a number of students have said, well, what is the point of doing that when you've got remote online class for the most part, which is a good point. And I can't argue with that logic. So I'm going to make the exams available online, all 5 exams. The 4 intermediate exams, the final exam in week 15. And so you'll have the option, again, the option remains, you can come into class, take the exam. It'll be open book because the online exams are open book. And there's no way for us to come to your house and prevent you from looking at your book or whatever. So you can do it in class. You can do it at the testing center if you want. And I realized one of the attractions that we thought would benefit students was the fact that a lot of people did not like the online format at all and had challenges of their own, particularly since they're not the only household member who sometimes needs a good hour or 2 online at a time. So, we thought maybe offering this option, maybe you could pick and choose which days and times you attend class was a good one. But we realized that, that it's now an issue where if we're fully online, if we have an online option, why don't we have the exam online? So the exam will be online, but the same exam you take here, or the same exam you take at the testing center. So nothing has changed. The syllabus itself is still the same, with that one exception. That exam will probably be available, though, since it's an online exam. It'll probably be available sometime in the beginning of that week, or maybe after the class session, the review session. I'll probably post it then, and I'll give you a few days to do that. That'll probably be how we work that out. I've only come to this conclusion in the last couple of hours after talking, but I understand the logic. And by the way, I've gotten a lot of emails from students, and I have not yet gotten back to everybody. I'm doing my best. This is a busy time of the semester for us, so I will get back to everybody. If I don't get back to you by tomorrow at the very latest, but it'll probably be today. And email me again. Sometimes these get sort of embedded within each other, and if you have the same topic line, they sort of get jumbled together. But I will do my very best to get back to you. But also feel free to call me as well. So, okay, so nothing has changed in regard to that. Also, I do want to make you aware of the fact that I'll try to do something with regard to the formatting of the PowerPoints. Also, throughout the semester, I'll probably be posting additional links to news stories, to things that come up in micro. The micro world doesn't change as quickly as the macro world does. So if you've taken macro before, which a lot of you probably have, just given our course numbering system, you might find that there was a lot of discussion of current events. There's a little less of that here, but it does happen, particularly when it comes to companies buying each other and the government weighing in on whether or not that should happen or not. So, okay. All right, so questions from me before we get started. I hope you like the ability to take the exam online. I think that's probably a good resolution to this issue right now. And the other thing too, one of my colleagues was concerned too that there are a number of class members who are reluctant to come on campus because of COVID concerns or have not been vaccinated, and that's another issue too. I mean, somebody today who has not been vaccinated at all, and I said, well, right? You're not supposed to be here. I'm not the cops, but I mean, I can just tell you what the rule is. So that's, that sort of thing. And I realize, without getting into the politics of the vaccine, I realize that people have concerns. This is a way around that, so you don't have to come to campus at all, unless you want to, and we're more than glad to see you. So good. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So what the plan was for this week, I was just going to get into chapter 1 a bit. And by the way, I may be sort of weaving in and out of chapters 1 and 2. The topics that are discussed in those early introductory chapters are very common to a lot of what we want to present as foundational introductory material in econ in general. And so I may be sort of weaving in and out, but that will not be the norm as we go forward, because I'll be more specific as to the particular topic. But these are sort of foundational concepts. But then toward the end of the class session, I'll get into some of the math piece with regard to Appendix A. It won't be word for word. It'll be sort of my letting you know what to expect as far as the math goes. So you want to read that as well. And by the way, as to the readings, it's probably helpful to you to read the material prior to coming to class. I mean, I know that doesn't always happen. In fact, it probably does not happen in the majority of cases, but nonetheless, it may be of help to you if you are able to do that, just so that you have some familiarity with what is going on. Okay. Okay, so I think last time we left off where we were talking about economics, and we were talking about the two branches of econ, the differences between micro and macro. And we talked about the fact that macro was sort of this big picture from outer space view of entire economies, including the global economy. And micro is more of the street level view. And by that, we simply mean the observation of individual items, individual firms, even individual industries at times, but individual goods being sold for individual prices to individual consumers, individual workers going to work. So so one of the definitional items was the study of markets. And I think that's probably, if I had to tell somebody what micro is about, I'd say it's the study of markets. Okay. So I wanted to just briefly touch on what economists do. There's a slide in your PowerPoint package. And by the way, something you might want to mute your microphone a little bit, because I'm picking up some background noise there. Hopefully you can hear me, but I'm unfortunately picking up some weird stuff. So what I want to talk about what economists do, and I don't want to spend a lot of time on this because it's not all that critical, but I think that it's entirely possible for a lot of people to go through life without ever having met an economist. And I do believe that there, as I mentioned on Monday, that there is occasionally some confusion as to what we do and why it is we do and say the kind of things that we say. And for instance, the example I gave was the minimum wage. And I know that if you ask the average person on the street, should minimum wage be raised? I think probably most people would say, well, yeah, that's a great idea, raise minimum wage. Economists, though, probably the majority, I think that's pretty safe to say, would say that minimum wage laws in general tend to increase unemployment because there are workers for whom some employers simply are not going to pay the wage in question, simply because maybe the job doesn't require the skills that would be commensurate with that particular wage. Like I know the $15 wage has been in place in certain cities, San Francisco, I think, Seattle, I don't know about New York. There's been a lot of talk about it here in New Mexico, where here in Albuquerque it's $11.50. But a lot of businesses have been saying $15 an hour, I can't really make money on what we do, and I really can't afford to do it. If it's a full-time job, that translates to about $31,000, $32,000 a year, which is not a great deal of money, but for an unskilled person, that's not too bad. Okay, and I know that there are issues concerning living wage, and we don't want to exploit workers and all that. And I fully understand that. Believe me, as a labor economist, I fully understand that. But all we're simply saying is that there is a belief that it does increase unemployment because employers will simply say, I won't fill that position again if it comes out to be $15 per hour or whatever the proposed wage is. I've actually heard of higher than that. I heard an economist talking the other day about the fact that minimum wage, in order to have caught up with inflation in the early 70s, it should be $24 per hour. That's a big minimum wage. I think we can all agree. And 15 is a difficult hill to climb. I think 24 is going to be impossible. But you get the idea that employers will simply not hire as many workers as a result. Isn't that what unemployment is? More workers than what there are jobs for. So that's an issue. And so when we talk about this, we'll talk about this issue of what should happen versus what does happen. And I think that's really the question here. So teaching and research are some of the things that economists do. And obviously that's what I'm doing here. Now, one of the things about the econ profession, as I've been doing this a while, I've had a number of students who have gone on to do their undergraduate majors at UNM and New Mexico State and elsewhere. They've gone on to graduate school. I've got one of my students who's just finishing his PhD, which is great. I think that's excellent that he'll be joining us and probably in academia, at that point. So it's a very small profession. I get that. I think there are more neurosurgeons in the United States than there are economists. And so it's very small, but there are a lot of opportunities for those who like the work, whether it's in teaching, whether it's in business, and a lot of them are employed in business. One area that's growing is healthcare economics. It's a growing field. Also, government has long hired economists. And I know we routinely graduate people from graduate school at UNM who go to work for the government in various capacities. And so, or you could potentially do all three, I suppose, or also work in consulting. That's another particular opportunity. So there are a lot of jobs that are available, and it does simply require usually some sort of graduate background to do it. But if you really like it, a lot of people do, then you can look into it. A lot of people don't like it, and I get that too. I really understand the fact that econ is not everyone's cup of tea. I get that, believe me, I do get that. So but I'm just pointing out what some economists do. Also, advising political leaders is a big one. We've never had an economist who has become president of the United States. We've had a lot of members of Congress who have, but never a president. I know that there was a great series on TV a few years ago, The West Wing, where the president was an economist, and a lot of us thought that was a little ridiculous. Most of us don't feel like we could get elected into anything, much less the presidency. And he was a Nobel Prize winning economist at that. So advising political leaders, and we can't expect for politicians to really know and to be able to keep up and study all the data that we study as economists. It just simply is not fair. I mean, we know that Joe Biden is not an economist, and so he must rely upon advisors as would our governor, as would any political leader. So advising them is important. And also, finally, here, making statements and pronouncements is important. And there are really two forms of economic statements. The term pronouncements might be a little bit grandiose, I realize. So maybe statements is better. And there are two of these, and there are two forms. And I believe your text gets into this a little bit, not as much as what I think is necessary. That is positive economic statements, okay? And positive economic statements and normative economic statements. So positive and normative. I think it's pretty bad, isn't it? So let me get rid of that pen there. Positive and normative. Oh, and by the way, I have so whoever comes in here before me, looks like a stats class. They must use a super duper marker, because I have trouble getting it off. So I'm gonna try to get some cleanser. I don't know if it looks as dirty to you on the screen as it does to me, but it's pretty dirty. So positive versus normative. So let's talk about what these are. I know these are in your PowerPoint slides. Hopefully everybody can see that. Okay, I've tried to get as tight a focus on the middle board as possible so that you can just use one board. So we talk about positive economic statements. We're talking about statements of what is. Statements of what is or what are, whichever you prefer. What is, what are. And in other words, it derives. So in the term positive, I want to be clear about one thing here, because it has sometimes been interpreted incorrectly as positive being good news, that a positive economic statement is something that's positive. Unemployment is falling, which it is, and that's considered a positive, but it's not a positive economic statement. It actually just so happens that it's both. But if unemployment were rising, I don't think too many people would say that's good news, but it would be a positive economic statement because it's a statement of what is. And in other words, it's objective, it's measurable, it is not really subject to a lot of argument. There may be argument about how the figure or the conclusion was arrived at, but there's no real debate about what is. or what are, what it is we're talking about. So it's usually objective, measurable, observable, and it flows. And the term positive, if you wonder, well, why do we call it positive if it's not good news? It comes from sort of an intellectual tradition that goes back really to the Renaissance and to the Enlightenment, something called positivism, which is really a philosophical concept that talks about viewing the world as it is, scientifically, objectively, without ascribing supernatural phenomena to why things may happen, right? So like the ancient Greeks at one point thought that thunder was the gods actually engaging in bowling. So I'm not making this up. The gods were engaging in bowling. I think today we have a different understanding of what thunder is, right? So it's not viewing the world in supernatural sorts of terms. I'm not being anti-theological. I'm simply saying that nor is this idea in itself inherently oriented that direction. It's simply saying let's view the world and how it is and what is going on. So in and of itself, it's not controversial. Where all the trouble begins is here with statements of what should be, And this is where all the trouble begins when it comes to controversy, because what I think should happen is maybe not what you think should happen or what somebody else should think would happen. So the examples that I gave in the PowerPoint package were the unemployment rate is 7%. Okay, so and that's basically objective, it's measurable, it's observable. It's not particularly controversial in its own right in terms of what the statement is, whether it's good news or bad news. And I think 7% unemployment would probably not be considered to be terribly great news because of the fact that now we consider full employment to be somewhere between 4 and 5%, which is really where we are right now. We pretty much are at full employment. The main difficulty with that, and if you've had macro before, is the fact that we've lost a lot of people from the labor force who just simply have been dropped out of the calculation because they're no longer participating. A lot of early retirees, a lot of people who just left, people who want to wait to see what happens with the pandemic before going back to work, maybe who work in a job that they feel is too risky for themselves and their dependents, maybe some of whom are ill themselves. And so that is an issue. But nonetheless, I think most of us would agree that the actual rate of unemployment is not particularly controversial. It is what it is. On the other hand, if we say that unemployment should be lower than 7%, maybe it should be 4%, well, some people would maybe not necessarily agree, or I think 5% was the figure I used there. Maybe not everyone would agree that 5% should be the figure. And by the way, as to unemployment, I know when I first graduated from college, we were coming off, the US economy was coming off a period in which we had double-digit unemployment, 10, 11% for a good couple of years, 2 or 3 years. And when we got to 7%, it kind of stalled right there. And this was my senior year in college. And we had economists in my department saying, maybe this is what full employment is 7%. And that's as good as it's going to get, given our productive workforce, the wage levels and all that. Well, now we've pushed it down about 4%, 4 to 5%. So now we're thinking that's maybe the rate of unemployment, what should be the natural rate. So these things change, and a lot of this is what economics is about, is the fact that things do change a lot. And so our views change, which is why what should be will necessarily change. So it's more of opinion based when it comes to normative statements. Normative means what should happen, right? So if I think the unemployment rate should be even less than 4%, then that is my own particular view, and it would be controversial. I think that's safe to say. But by the way, think about this. The thing about normative economic statements is this, and this is really the key driver here. It is they form the foundation for policy. They form the foundation for policy. And so as a result of this, and as we know, economic policy, as it's enacted by mostly governmental leaders, is often controversial. I don't think we can get into too big of an argument that sometimes it's controversial. The policy itself might not be something that we all agree upon. As an example, we've been witness to at least 3 pretty good sized stimulus checks that have been sent by the government to households. There have also been the things that the government's done to sort of stimulate businesses, things having like the Paycheck Protection Program, for workers who have not laid workers off, for firms who have not laid workers off during the pandemic. So there have been stimulus measures enacted by the government for both households and for businesses. And a lot of people have said, well, maybe we shouldn't have more of that. Others have said we should have more than that. Right now, there's talk about another stimulus check potentially coming through this year. March is what the last speculation I heard. That is not a done deal yet. And if I had to guess, right now, just today, I would say it probably won't happen. But I have been wrong before, and I think we should understand that it could happen. It very much could happen. If you'd asked me 2 years ago, will we have a pandemic that's going to really alter our relationships for 2 years, I would have definitely not thought that was going to happen. Okay. All right. So questions for me about any of that so far. And I apologize for stepping out of the camera a bit here, but I want to go ahead and erase this, and hopefully you're able to see this. I did want to try to write as big as I could. I realize my handwriting is a methodist, so I try to do the best that I can. So, all right. So what I want to do is this. I want to get into the beginnings of some model building. And what models are simply this. They are ways for us to present the world in different kinds of ways. So when we talk about models, and your book has really, I think, a great bit of explanation for what models are. They're representations, they're simulations, they're graphic illustrations of economic phenomena. And model building is done throughout in a lot of different areas. It's done in the business world, it's done in government, it's certainly done here in academics with economics. So when we talk about the models, we're talking about simply ways for us to view what's happening in ways that make sense to us. Okay. And they are necessarily simplified. So if you think about some of the models that we're familiar with just in our own experience, even prior to stepping foot in an econ class, think about something like a blueprint for a house, or maybe even something like if you go look for apartments, you see a floor plan. Floor plan may be a little bit better because they're even less detailed than blueprints are, where you'll see maybe a door, maybe you see which way the door slides, but you won't see on that the doorknob, and you won't see things like light fixtures. You won't see things like the colors of the walls, the color of the carpeting, whether it even is carpeting or linoleum or whatever. Lots of details are missing, and that's what we are dealing with in economics. We're presenting models that are necessarily stripped down for simplicity's sake, but also to communicate some vital information. And the rest is discarded because it's not that it's not important, but it doesn't add additional detail to what we're trying to communicate, the big view that we're trying to communicate. So that's what models essentially do. And because we're simplifying it, we may leave out some things, and I will talk about that when we build our very first model, which is called the circular flow model, which is discussed in chapter 1. Let's talk about that. But before we do that, we need to identify who's who in that circular flow model. And so we want to talk about economic actors. And we have essentially 3 economic actor groups, okay? And these are, when we say actors, what are we really talking about here? And I want to be clear of one thing, and I can't recall just offhand how your book refers to these. So there is a tendency there for textbook writers to use the term agents as opposed to actors. And I think that has a lot to do with sort of legal relationships. Like a business firm is not really a person, but it's run by people who act as their agents. So the term agency has sort of a legal and sort of realm of authority kind of connotation. But I like the term actors because what do actors do? They play roles. They play different roles. So Harrison Ford is Han Solo on Star Wars, but he's also Indiana Jones on the Raiders of the Lost Ark series. He's the same person. He plays different roles. And they're very different kinds of characters. So we talk about economic actors. There are 3 of them, and they play different roles at different times. The first of these is the most basic, and we simply refer to those as households. Okay, so households are the first group. And this doesn't require lots of definition here. We all know what a household is. And it's comprised, as I noted in the PowerPoint slide, I noted that it was comprised of natural persons. Natural persons itself is a legal term that refers to people as biological entities as opposed to personhood in the form of some other entity, like a business firm, like an estate, like a trust, like a any other kind of partnership or whatever, any other kind of relationship. So it's made up of natural people, can be as small as one person. There was an effort a few years ago to sort of redefine this particular actor classification by not using the term household. And the idea there was that the term household was a bit misleading because the changing composition of households. That if you compare household composition over longer time periods, that they don't really match up very well with each other. And what I mean by it is this: it's kind of like it kind of reminds me of the rules of baseball. There are a lot of people who are reluctant to change the rules of baseball because you can't make comparisons between something that happened in 1910 and something that happened now, because you've now altered the rules by which you measure it. So this was the view that said that pushed back against the idea of changing households to simply a definition of households as just individuals only. But the idea was that, hey, household composition is changing. It's not even the same. You can't compare apples and oranges, because households today are composed of sometimes multiple generations, which in itself is not particularly new. Marital status is one thing that's definitely changed. A lot of households involve people who adult people who aren't married to one another, maybe will never be married together, maybe have children, maybe don't have children, maybe have children from other marriages or relationships, maybe married other people, all kinds of intricate relationships like that. And so indeed, the household composition is changing. However, the pushback to that is, okay, yes, that's true. Household composition is changing what it means, but we still want to treat the household as an economic unit because of some interesting characteristics of households, and that they tend to make big financial decisions as for the group itself. Housing, retirement, vacations, things of that nature. A lot of times are made with the collective group in mind, even if it's just 7 people who have no relationship to each other whatsoever. So you kind of get the idea that households are still groups of people living together, regardless of age, regardless of family status, regardless of blood relation, all that sort of thing. So households we still continue to view, even though there was a movement to say let's not refer to households as households because they don't look the same as what they used to be. But that's been sort of overridden by the greater necessity of trying to view their roles as actors. By the way, one interesting thing about households too that sort of supported that earlier, that view to revise, was the fact that a few years ago, adult women in the US were more likely to be unmarried than married. And that's the first time in recorded history that has been the case. I'm not talking about younger than 18. I'm talking about adult women were more likely to be unmarried than married, and that's a new thing, whether it's divorced or never married, widowed, whatever the case might be. So that obviously is a change in the demographics, and we are going to get a little bit more into the changing role of women in the workforce, particularly as we get to the labor piece, because of the fact that women have been steadily gaining, albeit not as quickly a pace as many would have it in terms of wages, responsibility, positions within firms and whatnot. And today, if you consider the fact that some of the largest corporations, some of the most important industries today, some of the biggest firms are headed by women. The auto industry, General Motors, is headed by a female. The tech industry, IBM, headed by a female. So this is good. Now, wages throughout the gender separation are not equivalent in all cases, and so that is the area we will get to. Okay, but right now, let's just cover this: economic actors. The second one is business firms themselves. We use the term firms just simply as a collection of all business firms. There are two qualifications for what constitutes a firm, and that is they've got to be privately owned and for-profit. For-profit and privately owned. So this would not include the for-profit sector. And by the way, we're going to be eliminated. We're not going to include that in our list here. And I know it sometimes comes up where there's a question, hey, what about the not-for-profit sector? Are you saying that we've got household firms that will add government here in a minute? But the not-for-profit part of the economy is not important, doesn't play a role. And the answer is, no, we're not saying that. Nobody's saying that that is not an important part of the economy. What we are saying, though, is the fact that the activity and the behavior really looks very similar to what for-profit, or privately owned for-profit firms do in terms of their acting, in terms of their behaving. So think about a not-for-profit hospital. They have all the same kinds of concerns that a for-profit operation does: control of costs, expansion of the enterprise, and also they tend to compensate their leaders fairly well. So the behavior is not all that much different. So, but we are going to, but the not-for-profit activities in terms of generating profit, that does not meet the qualification of for-profit that we are going to be exploring further when we get into economics of firms. And in this course, we will spend quite a bit of time talking about the economics of business firms. It does seem to be a very important part of this course. And the final one is government. So in the United States, we have a division that is sort of constitutionally originated. That is, there's a division between federal and state. And when we talk about federal and state, we have to recognize that that's local government, whether it's city or county or where I'm from. We even have a basic unit called townships. Those are all really functions of state government. They're simply a branch, an extension of state government. So city government is an extension of state government. So in this country, we have a federal and state division. That's what federalism is the idea that you've got individual autonomous entities, states, with one large combining entity of the federal government. That's really what federalism is all about. Okay. All right. So those are the actors, and we're going to be building these definitions and sort of folding those into the circular flow model. One thing we want to do is this: we want to sort of couple these together, and that is these guys together are what we call the private sector. Private sector, and this is not a term that's new to a lot of you, so it will sound familiar. The private sector. So first of all, let me talk a bit about sectors and what they are and why we're referring to them. So when economists talk about sectors, what we're talking about is simply dividing something very large. And I don't think anybody could argue that all U.S. households and all U.S. business firms is a fairly large grouping, but finding some means by which to connect them together somehow, and that they have some sort of commonality of behavior. And so what we're talking about when we talk about business firms together is that we're talking about decisions tend to be made privately on their own. This is in your slide package, and in their own, and in the actor's own self-interest. So if you're a household and you want to buy a new car, unlike in a command economy, in a free market economy, you just try to go buy a new car or a used car or whatever. You make the decision and you buy whatever car you like, whatever car you're able to afford, whatever car makes sense, and you're on your own, as opposed to a command economy where in those economies like the old Soviet Union are rapidly fading away, but they are still characterized by having to get your name on a list, to wait for a car to be produced. When that car arrives, whenever it arrives, if it arrives, it's going to be this particular color and this particular model, and you'll have no choice in the matter. So choice is a key issue. Remember, it goes back to this idea of how we even define economics. Choice is made under conditions of scarcity and uncertainty. And so these decisions are made, but they're made privately. You don't have to run it by anybody. You don't have to get on the list. You don't have to apply. You just have to get it done. Okay. Likewise, a business which makes two goods, shampoo and conditioner, they decided it doesn't want to make conditioner anymore because it's not very profitable. They're making most of their money making shampoo, so they just quit making conditioner, make shampoo only. And that's a decision that they make for themselves, for their own particular interest. They don't really have to run it by anybody. They just simply do it. Okay. This differs greatly then from everything else in what we call the public sector. And the public sector tends to be the opposite terms of decision-making and in terms of transparency. So decisions here tend to be made much more publicly. And I know when I say that, there are obviously exceptions where it concerns things like people's privacy and all that, and national security. Some of those decisions are not always broadcast and made available to everybody. But for the most part, they do tend to be made available publicly, these decisions, and they're done for the general public interest. not any one individual's interest, not any one business firm's interest, but the general public interest. And this is really what characterizes government, makes it a bit different from private actors. Private actors, in fact, there was an economist named Milton Friedman several years ago who said that business firms have only, and this is maybe a controversial statement, but this was his particular view. He said that business firms have only one goal, and that was to maximize the return to its shareholders, to its owners. And that they were not concerned with doing things like alleviating poverty. They were not, that wasn't their job. They weren't concerned with world peace. That wasn't their job. They weren't concerned with social causes. That wasn't their job. And obviously, I think that a lot of people don't really agree with that thinking today. I think a lot of people in those days, in the 60s and 70s, when he said those kinds of things, probably didn't agree. But nonetheless, I don't know that it was he was not terribly alone. I think a lot of businesses would say that there are a lot of social causes that are not their problem, because they're a private actor and the only responsibility they have is to their owners. Now, I think today, in today's day and age, I think that is probably not a very wise thing to say for a business that's publicly held, that is, their shares trade in the public markets and whatnot. I think they're a little bit smarter than that, where, and in fact, they have weighed in on lots and lots of social issues, particularly things like gender equity, sexual identity, voting rights, race relations, things of that nature. These are all social issues that business firms are increasingly weighing in on and are becoming fairly influential as a result. So again, differing views over what the proper role of actors should be, particularly as concerns government. And by the way, when we talk about these normative economic statements, these statements of what should be, they oftentimes involve government. So because that list I gave you of issues that businesses are increasingly involving themselves in really were previously the realm of government only. And it's really only the last several years, just the last several years, the governments have been, that businesses have been weighing in on that. And I recall that I think where this really started to pick up a lot of steam was in the year in which the state of Indiana passed a law that was very blatantly an anti-LGBT law. There's no question about it, where they said private businesses, you don't have to serve somebody if that service violates your religious beliefs. And it was not a particularly clever way of putting it, because the courts had already rejected a law that was much more explicit about the fact that if businesses don't want to serve LGBT customers, they can simply do it without any kind of violation of any civil rights standards already on the books, let alone anything new that might come along. They tried to do it again, and it wasn't the general public, but it was businesses that reacted very, very strongly to that. Salesforce, the big HR solutions company, said we're just going to pull out of Indiana if you don't fix this. And the Angie's List, which is now called Angie, had its headquarters, has always had its headquarters there, and said we're going to leave unless you fix this. And so this sort of activism is somewhat new, but it's been largely successful. Whether you agree with it or not, as a customer, as a shareholder, is your business. But again, I have never, even from day one, tried to say that economics is anything but involving at times contention, controversy, competition of ideas, and all that. So anyway, but these are the two sectors, public and private sector. The decisions are made differently and for the public interest. In the case of decisions are made privately in the private interest of the private sector, even despite the fact that firms are now starting to weigh in more on the public interest, which is something a little bit new. Government has always been concerned with the public interest, and decisions tend to be made publicly. And I realize that not all decisions that are made by government are immediately available and accessible to the public, but eventually they do sort of make their way to the public realm. Okay. So questions for me. I'm just looking at the clock here to make sure I don't run out of time. So, all right, I'm going to take these actors and I'm going to sort of build our first model of economics. Okay, again, what is a model? But a representation, a simulation, a view of the world as we think it is. And so, circular flow model is a very basic model of econ. If you've ever had any econ course before, I cannot imagine that you did not have a view of the circular flow model. It is a very basic model of the economy. However, having said that, we can add bits and pieces to the circular flow model to the point where it can become very intricate indeed. And for those of you who've taken macro before, I especially bring up macro because it's big picture and they include lots of international relations as well, international economic relationships. It can become very very intricate indeed. But our goal is not to get to that level of detail, particularly when it comes to international. Instead, what we're really more interested in focusing on are the actor groups and their relationships. So what we'll do is we will just simply create in a model, in a little simulation of who these actors are. And so we're going to, in no particular order, we'll put business firms out here. We'll put households out here. And by the way, it doesn't make any difference if we inverted these, we put this up here, down there, whatever. In fact, if you were to Google, do a search of the internet for circular flow models, I am confident you would run into millions and millions of hits, and they would probably all look a little bit differently. So mine is probably going to look a bit differently than what your text does. But as long as the relationships are clear, that's really the key issue. And then the final actor, all we're doing is simply moving these actors over here. So we've got government in the middle. Not that government plays a central role in the economy, but they do tend to tie together actors within the economy. So business firms, households, and governments. Okay. So at a very basic level here, what does economics look like from the standpoint of interactions between actors? Well, one of the things that I think is very clear that businesses produce goods which are transferred to households. So goods are transferred to households. We know this to be the case. So pretty much any good that you would consume is probably made somewhere by a firm. And I know that occasionally the question comes up, well, what if I made my own soap or whatever, which you can do, or make my own wine or whatever. Well, that would sort of make you a firm, whether or not you sell it or not, it would still make you a producer nonetheless. But that's really a small portion of the economy. Every year that goes by, I cannot imagine that there are too many people who are DIY everything, including the majority of goods that we sell. And by the way, we know that firms buy from other firms, and I'll get to that in a second, but about 2/3 of all spending, or around 70% of all spending in the US economy, is the transfer of goods from firms to households. Household spending is about 2/3 of all economic activity. Okay, so, and I'll get into a bit more of this distinction between goods and services probably next week. It'll probably be Tuesday, or I'm sorry, Monday, when we get into that a bit more. Okay, so that's a transfer of one thing to another. What about households? What do they provide to businesses? Well, they provide their labor. So households provide labor to firms. That's kind of weak. Let me try to get that a little bit bolder here. These markers don't, geez, they don't have much of a shelf life, I can tell you that. So they do not last long. So there, that word is labor. Okay, all right, that might be a little clearer. So households provide labor in exchange for their labor. They are able to get goods, but there's an intermediary step here. Oh, and by the way, I should say as well that a lot of circular flow models will have an intermediary step here, and that involves markets in which these are exchanged. Like households typically provide their labor through a labor market where it's a competitive market, that wages tend to be influenced by what's going on with the competitive environment of the market itself, buyers of labor, firms, and sellers of labor, households, and goods themselves are exchanged through all the markets that we're familiar with, goods markets, services markets, etc. And I've sort of cut those out because I think it just adds a little bit more than what we really need. Okay. All right. Well, we know that the exchange of goods, I'm going to go erase this. The exchange of goods is not done for free, that people have to pay for those goods which are exchanged. And so as a result, when we talk about households receiving goods, we know that there's got to be flow in the other direction, and it's got to be equal and commensurate. And so we are talking about spending, or as macroeconomists would say, consumption, but we'll just call it spending. And we'll put a little green arrow there because that is a monetary flow. Obviously, the value of goods is not provided for free. People have to pay. Okay, so there's that money flow going in that direction. And then likewise, labor, people don't go to work for free. And so as a result, they expect to be compensated for their labor. And so as a result, firms will compensate workers with wages, which are also a dollar flow. Okay. Nothing particularly earth shattering here. One flow in this direction is reversed by the value of the spending that takes place in the other direction. So, and what we can say about this particular kind of model here is that we're talking about this inside ring here. We're talking about something called the physical flow. The physical flow, that is the physical flow of goods or services. Again, I want to make clear, we'll get into a bit more of the distinction between goods and services a bit more a little bit later, but for right now, we'll just use the term goods as a euphemism for goods and services. And even the term physical itself is maybe a little bit outdated because a lot of goods, the physical nature of it is irrelevant if there even is a physical nature. Like if you go to an attorney to be represented in some matter, there's really nothing physical that's being produced. It's the service that's being produced. And if you go to get a haircut, for instance, there's really no physical good that you're walking out with. And whatever physical observational issue is simply, part of the incidental nature of it. Like I go get my taxes done, I pay the accountant. I didn't pay for pieces of paper. I went there to get my taxes done. So that's a physical flow, even though there's nothing really physical happening. And if you don't like that term physical flow so much because it's maybe a bit outdated, there was a term that sort of grew legs during the last recession, particularly because of a financial crisis that was buried down. And so people began calling that red flow the real economy, the quote unquote real economy, as opposed to the money economy, which we'll get to in a minute. But the idea being that the real economy often doesn't have the same kinds of troubles and periodic issues that the financial economy does. And so when the economy first started to go south in around 2007, 2008, that was the last serious recession we had prior to COVID. It was really caused by the financial sector. A lot of people were saying, well, but okay, it's the real economy that is still fine. Okay, so that's the real economy, that red flow. And what's this? And this is the so-called financial flow. The financial flow. Or you could simply refer to this as the money economy. And we get into this distinction a bit more in detail in macro than we do here in micro, but we do use the circular flow model just to sort of illustrate what these relationships are between actors within the economy itself. So one thing that is also important to note, and this is a concept that is not only just unique to economics, but it also works its way into accounting and finance and a lot of other areas, and that is this. What is the value of anything? Such as, what's the value of a toaster that I bought? What's the value of a new car? What's the value of a house? What's the value of my labor? What should an engineer make, for instance? What should a nurse make? Well, we say that the value of something is what someone's willing to pay for it. It's also what someone's willing to accept as well. That's the part of that that's often not stressed. Something is worth what someone's willing to pay for it. That is true. And you're always hearing about somebody who just bought a piece of art for $20 million or whatever. It's like, why is it, somebody will say, why is it worth $20 million? And the answer is because someone's willing to pay for it. So that is therefore the value of that good. If somebody is not willing to pay for it, then it's really hard to say that it's not worth that, or that it is worth that when someone is not willing to pay for it. You can think something is worth whatever, but if no one's going to pay for it, then it's not really true. And I know when I first moved to Albuquerque, I was renting a house, and the owner had taken a job in Canada, but still wanted to own it, and he was renting it to me. And at one point said, I'll sell it. I'll sell the house to you if you like. And so I made him an offer, and he came back with an offer that was just ridiculous. It was many tens of thousands of dollars more than what the actual, even the appraised value had indicated. And yet he sort of stuck to his guns and said, no, this is what I think the house is worth. And it's like, well, okay, you can think whatever you like. You can think that Mickey Mouse is the president. That doesn't really make it true, right? So, and by the way, I'm not willing to pay you that for it. So find somebody who will. And I know he never did find anybody willing to pay for that house. It's still being rented. So you get the idea. Something's worth what someone's willing to pay for it, and that includes wages as well. And I know there's always a lot of debate over whether someone's being compensated fairly for the work that they're doing. This is, in fact, one of the motivating factors for minimum wage laws, is the idea that sometimes workers are not being compensated correctly for the work that they are performing, that sometimes they're being undercompensated. You usually don't hear the argument that workers are being overpaid, except about the only cases that I hear are professional athletes, when somebody questions why a particular pro athlete is paid what he or she is being paid. And we say it's because the economy is willing to pay that person for that. So, okay. Yes, it would be very nice to make $100 million over a 5-year contract or whatever. But there aren't that many people in the world who are able to command that. So that's why not everyone's running around with $100 million contracts. Okay. All right. That's the circular flow model. Now, there are all kinds of flows and bits and pieces we can throw into this. We can throw into, the rest of the world with goods coming in, goods leaving, that is imports and exports. We have other money flows like loans from banks. And in our macro course, we usually set up a financial sector, including banks and whatnot. There are really only two things that we're sort of missing here, really, and that is that businesses sometimes buy from other businesses, often. So goods are exchanged in this direction, and then spending goes back in the other direction. I mentioned a few minutes ago that spending goes in the other direction there. And the only other flow, that's a dollar flow. The only other flow really is the idea of both firms and households paying, taxes. Paying taxes in the form of dollars. And by the way, I want to stress one thing when I say dollars of the US economy and whatnot. I know that and a lot of our students don't come from the US and maybe would not want this discussion to be solely focused on the US. Well, I can tell you this, I get that, I really understand that, but if we're just doing modeling, we're just using examples and whatnot, the US is as good an example of anybody for an economy, because most economies in the world today really resemble what we have going on here in the United States. And given the fact that I think probably most of us are here and are working, earning, paying taxes and whatnot, it probably makes sense to go with that particular example. Okay, so both pay taxes in. Now you notice there's no red arrow coming out representing some sort of real economy, and yet we know the government does engage in spending. So we could probably put this here. The problem is, and I want to be very clear here, that when we talk about government expenditure, which I'll just call government expenditure, it does not match up very well with taxes. Okay, it's really hard to say that the government is getting its money's worth on this expenditure, given the level of taxes, because that's not how taxes work. We don't match up individual tax payments with individual government expenditures, even though people attempt to do that all the time. And we see this when people are engaged in tax protest movements. We saw it happening during the Iraq War, where people said, I'm not going to pay X% of my federal taxes because I don't agree with the war, and we're spending X% of the federal budget on the war, so therefore I'm not going to do it. It doesn't work that way. You're not allowed to do that. You have to pay the taxes that are due. It's the law, okay? Or what is probably more frequently held is that people will say, I'm not paying my local property taxes because the majority of that goes to support public schools, and I have no children. So why should I pay for someone else's kids to go to school? And maybe you think that's a good argument. I don't know, but it doesn't work that way. You don't get to pick and choose. And by the way, some of your property taxes come here to CNN to subsidize your tuition, so that probably may not be an argument you might make. So anyway, so it doesn't work that way. So the matching up of the value of this versus the value of that is difficult to do, and so we probably shouldn't try to do it. And that ignores the whole debate about whether the government should have paid $50 for a hammer. That whole thing, that is not even the subject here. It's matching up the value here and here with this, which is difficult. And then finally, we know the government pays workers' wages, or actually it goes this way, doesn't it? So government expenditure, taxes, and or people who provide labor. Yeah, this is it. And the wages go in the other direction. I know I have an arrow wrong there. And then wages. And there are other things as well. And again, we can get as detailed as what we like here with regard to things like benefits and Social Security and whatnot. And again, that's really not what I'm trying to do here because it takes it just is too much detail. It's not really important. Okay. All right. So that is the circular flow model. This is my own particular creation. And again, you can, as I said at the outset, you can find. I think the last time I Googled circular flow, I came in with over 1 million hits, and it's probably exploded since the last time I did that. Coming from things like textbooks, instructors' lecture notes, just who knows, all kinds of different places, with all kinds of different organizations of these different levels of detail. In this class, I try to keep the detail to a minimum because I don't think that we need to burden ourselves with things which are interesting and true, but not relevant. Okay, not relevant. So I'm going to go ahead and erase this for now because I want to move on to the final bit of this week's material, and that has to do with some of the mathematical content of the course. And if you've had a look at Appendix A, hopefully it is comprehensible to you. If it's not, let me try to help with some of that. Okay, so I know, as I said on Monday, that a lot of students, well, not a lot, but some fair amount have some concerns periodically about what is expected in terms of the mathematics and math requirements of the course. And so I want to sort of dispel what some of the misconceptions are, and then maybe highlight and focus on what are important to talk about. So when we talk about the math piece, what we're really saying is this. We're not going to be doing lots of equation solving in the course, but we will do some, particularly as we get into, I think it's chapter 5, elasticity. And so that will involve some algebra, okay? But we're doing a lot of graphing. So I talked a little bit earlier about model building and what models were, and among models are graphic representations. And you all are probably familiar with this particular construction here, right? Of the XY coordinate plane, sometimes called the Cartesian coordinate plane, where you've got 4 quadrants, 1, 2, 3, 4. And you've got positive values on this axis, positive values on this axis, negative values on these 2 axes here. And as a result, any kind of place that you would make a point, you would have some XY coordinate. Some XY coordinate. And so if we call this point A, then we can simply call this XA and YA as being the coordinate that matches up with its particular coordinates here. And so X is a positive value and Y is a negative value. So hopefully that is pretty clear, that coordinate system. And an important part of this too is the origin. I think that's something that I'll simply refer to a lot in this course when doing graphing, particularly as we get into talking about the way things are moving in economics. Economics is a dynamic discipline. By dynamic, I mean things are changing and moving around a lot. And one of the things that I've long likened economic study to is looking at a kaleidoscope, where you turn a kaleidoscope and things, all the pieces move. Not just one piece moves and everything else stays the same, but a lot of pieces move, and that's a lot of what happens in economics. It is a system of moving parts. Certainly in macro, but also in micro, where some things change, where workers are now being paid higher wages, and so maybe firms are reluctant to produce as much output, and as a result, they're going for higher prices, and maybe consumers demand less of the goods because of higher prices. Yada yada yada. It's one thing leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, and this is a characteristic of economic study pretty much everywhere. Okay. Well, this particular model, I'll give you a little bit of good news, and that is the origin is only going to be in one position in all the graphs in the course. And that's going to be the fact we're only going to be working with the first coordinate in this class, positive values against positive values. That doesn't mean that every equation you might see only involves plus signs to separate terms. There may be minus signs, but a plus is simply, or any kind of increase, just think about it as moving away from the origin and is moving to the right, and think about something that's decreasing, moving to the left. And I kind of bring everybody back to the number line that we've all seen since, oh gosh, our whole lives, right? We've got 0, 1, 2, 3, etc. And -1, -2, yada, yada, all that. So if you think about an increase is always to the right. a decrease is always to the left. And that's how I want people to think about any kind of function or value or anything that we're modeling in this course. If it's an increase, it's moving away from the origin to the right. If it's a decrease, it's moving back toward the origin to the left. Okay, that's so if I say the demand curve for this particular good shifts to the right, I'm saying it's increasing. We're not saying, and I probably won't say it's increasing, demand is increasing, even though that's what's happening. Mostly because, and we'll see this in chapter 3, it's mostly because when we do that, it's a bit misleading to say something is increasing because it may look like it's increasing when it's actually decreasing. So I would like everybody to think right, left, not up, down, okay? When it comes to actions that take place on this particular model, that's the only limiting condition there, okay? All right, so we go back to this idea of coordinate planes. You get positive values against positive values. And let's say we pick a spot here, it's an A, and so we'll simply call that XA and YA, and that is those are the two coordinates that these line up with. So this is YA and XA here. And there's no particular reason why X is called the X-axis and Y is called the Y-axis. Nor is there a reason why the horizontal coordinate is placed before the vertical coordinate separated by a comma. That's just the convention. You've all seen it elsewhere. And by the way, there is one big convention that economists have violated that mathematicians probably would never do. And I'll get to that in chapter 3. Let's not worry about that right now. It has to do with really dependency and whatnot. So if we take this idea, we have this particular Y, this particular point A, it may represent something, whatever it represents. By the way, X is a variable of some kind and Y is a variable of some kind. It could simply be something like this. X could be something like hours worked, right? And Y could be something like wages paid, okay? X is hours worked, Y is wages paid. So what do you think this would look like if something changed whereby, say, X changed, okay, or the X value changed? In other words, what if maybe now workers are not working X sub A hours, now they're working X sub B hours? In other words, it's an increase to the right. What do we think would happen? Well, I think we have a new point here, and XB, YB might be the new coordinate. So we'll call that point B with new coordinates X sub B, Y sub B. So in other words, things have changed. That is, we're no longer operating at point A on this labor graph. We're now operating at point B. This is what we would expect to see happen, isn't it? The idea if there are more hours worked, there are more wages paid. In other words, there's a direct relationship between these two. And by the way, if you wanted to find out what that rate of change would be, in 2 points in a two-dimensional system like this, you can simply connect them and you end up with a line segment. Remember that in 2 dimensions, which is what this is, an axis going this way, that's 1 dimension. An axis going this way, that's another dimension. We can do a 3rd dimension by imagining that we're going through the board here. We can sort of trick the eye and sort of draw a little z-axis there, if we want. But that is the end of the eye tricking. But it does exist. But we're only talking about 2 dimensions, horizontal and vertical dimension. We would expect this to be upward sloping, wouldn't we? That is the idea that if people work more hours, they're paid greater amounts of wages. And so what do we have? We have a line here, don't we? And in other words, they're connected one to the other. And so the question is, okay, well, and this is a question that comes up all the time in economics, and that is if workers work more wages, they're employed more hours, or I'm sorry, work more hours, then what is the effect on wages? So it's how many hours versus how much in the way of wages. So the question is, it's the rate of change. And so in other words, what is if X goes up and we know that Y goes up, how much does it go up? In other words, if we simply plug in some value, what if they work 50 hours more per week at this plant? How much more wages will we be paid? Or likewise, if we're operating at B and we work fewer hours, then how fewer wages are being paid. In other words, we're looking at the slope of that particular thing. But before we get to slope, let's talk about something called a function, okay? Again, if you're really strong at math and you think, okay, got it, check, then I trust you, and feel free to simply move on with your day. But if you want to hear this anyway, then feel free to. Let's talk about a function a little bit, okay? So when we talk about functions, we're simply talking about a functional mathematical relationship, right? And I'm running out of ink here. So it's a relationship between variables. It's a relationship between mathematical variables. In other words, we have to be able to quantify them. And where we can't quantify them, where they're of a qualitative nature, we have a way of dealing with that as well. But for our purposes here, relationship between mathematical variables. In other words, that we can assess these by using math. Hours worked is a mathematical variable. Wages paid is a mathematical variable. So what's the relationship between these mathematical variables? Well, we know that we talk about a functional relationship. We're talking about some kind of relationship in which we've got some y value and we've got some x value. In other words, it's a connection between y and x. And by the way, they don't have to be called y and x. I'm just simply using the variables that we are, first exposed to in mathematics. This could be g. This could be w for wages. This could be h for hours. It doesn't make any difference. So there's a connection between these, and that is a functional relationship. We say that y is a function of x, or y goes f of x. And what that simply means is that x does what x does, and y does what it does, but y is really sort of dependent upon what happens with x. Think about this, and that is that we typically call these values here that are subject to change by intervention, by management, by whatever you want to call it, human action. We tend to call them independent variables. If I choose to work additional hours, that's my choice. If my employer chooses to have additional hours worked, that's their choice. They're independent. They are independent variables. They're subject to management or manipulation. Whereas the y values are simply known as dependent variables. Okay. One other way of thinking about it is this: that y doesn't do anything. Y just simply is, and that y is the scoreboard. I think it's the scoreboard. So think about this, like in a football game. X is a running back who runs into the end zone with the ball, scores a touchdown. And y is the scoreboard, so the y goes up by 6 points for that team, right? It's not the case that the scoreboard operator puts 6 points on, and then the running back says, oh gosh, now I've got to run the ball in because the score's already up on the board. We know it doesn't work that way, right? So this causes that to happen. The scoreboard doesn't do anything, it just simply is. It just simply reflects that. Wages aren't something that's directly managed. Instead, it is something that's a function of hours worked. And particularly, obviously, if it's a functional relationship between hours worked and wages paid. I think that's a pretty easy assumption to make, is that there is a connection between the two of these. So one thing works on another. So y is considered to be a function of x. Okay. So if we're talking about functions and relationships between mathematical variables, then what can we say about some sort of linear function, right? Which is what this really is. We're connecting 2 points in space. Shortest distance is a straight line. So we talk about a linear function. We're simply saying, what's the definition of a linear function? It's simply one in which the rate of change of one variable in relation to the change of another variable is constant between any 2 points along that. Whether you're going this direction upward or this direction downward, it's the same relationship. We simply call that a slope. When we talk about a linear function, most linear functions will take the y-x combination, but instead it'll simply be, this is the generic right out of mathematics, y equals mx plus b, where y is the value of y for every x, right? B is the intercept where this crosses over the y-axis, if it crosses over at all. If it doesn't, if it's 0, we can just simply drop it off. The key thing here is m, which is the slope. M equals slope. The slope is the rate of change. It's the rate of change between one variable and another. Oops. Between one variable and another. And so I didn't quite get to everything I wanted to get to in this particular math piece, but I'm very close to getting it. This is probably an okay stopping point. So we pick it up on Monday. I will pick up the idea of slope and finish that up and talk about how slopes work, why they're important, and more importantly, why they're important in economics, in microeconomics, and how we use them. Then I'll get into some of the content from chapter 2 dealing with a little bit more foundational content of economics. And oh, I'm sorry, we're not here on Monday. I keep saying Monday. We're off on the holiday, the Martin Luther King holiday. We won't be here, so there won't be a link or a Zoom session. I apologize. I totally forgot about that. And I talked about a whole lot on Monday. It'll be Wednesday. And so that's probably going to take up most of our next class session is this, and then finishing up some of the content from chapter 2. That'll prime us then to get into a conversation about chapter 3. And the way it looks right now, despite the holiday, I think we'll still be on track to have our first exam, whether on campus, in person, or online by week 4. So can I answer any questions for anybody about anything at this point? Okay, well, have a great weekend. I will post everything for the link to this as soon as I'm able to get it file compressed and all that. And if you have questions in the meantime, get with me, and I will be addressing everyone's individual questions here just as soon as I can. So I'll see you next time.